Yeshua, Talia. Oof. Daniel and Talia, you have some really good critiques of this week's Torah portion. It's not just any Torah portion, as we know, this is the big one. And you're both concerned about the abuse of power, the potential abuse of power when we put a person between us and God, or when we put a person above us, where there isn't complete equality, that there's real harm that can be done. And Talia, you taught us that in this story, as Judith Plaskow teaches famously, it became that half the population was ignored because of this fault in the way that God was communicating with the people. I just want to note that it's interesting that both of you chose to talk about the human abuse of power and the dangers of leaders abusing their power. And as I read each of your Divrei Torah, I thought to myself, they have grown up in this particular moment in America. No wonder they're afraid of leaders who abuse power. And I'm sorry that is your formative experience. But something happened at Mount Sinai that was really astounding. And I don't want us to lose track of that. God did actually speak directly to an entire population through lightning and thunder and fire and a voice. And people received the Ten Commandments collectively. That's why we all stood. And as it compares to other divine revelations of that time in other traditions, this is the only one from that time that includes collective revelation. Otherwise, it's only through a priest or a prophet or a holy man of some kind or another. So this is something that we need to actually note, that it wasn't as egalitarian as it could have been, but it was pretty democratic, pretty egalitarian as these things went. And the people, in encountering God in this moment, had some kind of experience that was so powerful for them, so overwhelming, that they had synesthesia in the moment. They had this thing that happens not often, where their senses crossed. The Torah says that they saw the voice, not that they heard the voice. And that's understood to mean that they were in awe. They were stunned. And we take this as a very, very key foundational moment in terms of our relationship with God, because from that point on, well, and particularly since the fall of the temple, we have believed very much that no one stands between us and God, and that is a core idea of Judaism. Psalm 139 tells us that human beings are in touch with the divine all the time, wherever we go, that in fact we cannot get away. God is near us and around us and in us. However, we see in this example of Moses that human beings misunderstand or mishear the divine call a lot of the time. We interpret it or hear it through their filters of time and place, through their biases, through their limited constructs. They use metaphor or language to try to imperfectly approximate what they've come to feel and be inspired with. And often that ends up being very, very far away from, even unrecognizable from the original inspiration. An example of this that we've encountered many times today in our prayers is the metaphor of God as king, which isn't really the idea that God is actually a king, but became that idea in time, this kind of reified concept. And even the name we have for God, Adonai, which we've said in every prayer, which is translated as Lord throughout the world, but which is a stand-in for Yud He Vav He, our actual name for God, the thing that it's pointing to, which is a verb, and it's in the present and the future. It's the verb to be. That's our actual name for God. So this is how it happens. Over time and in our interpretations, we remove ourselves from the actual source of the inspiration. But your point is that no one should ever be able to get between us and God. Both of you, that was your point. That people can try to do that, but also, as you pointed out, I think, Talia more, is that fear can do that. Fear can do that. I think you both pointed that out. And so we have in this moment, after the part you talk about, the Israelites saying to Moses, this is too frightening. Please go forward instead of us. Torah says, all the people witnessed the thunder and the lightning, the blare of the horn, and the mountain smoking, and when they saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey, but let not God speak to us, lest we die. And we saw with the prophet Isaiah the fear of that encounter. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. But the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. And I think it was you, Daniel, who said that one of the differences between Moses and other people was he was not afraid. So it was our fear that put Moses between us and God. What we know about Moses is he was incredibly humble, and he was very incredibly reluctant. It wasn't his agenda to stand between us and God, but it is what happened. So I want to look at the words of Kalanimus Kalman Shapira, the Eish HaKodesh, who was an extraordinary rabbi who taught on this very parsha on January 27, 1940. He was living at that time in Europe during the rise of the Nazis, and he later died in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he wrote some of the most important and inspiring commentaries on Torah that we have. On this parsha in 1940, he didn't write about the theophany at Sinai, this moment that we've just been talking about, but about the beginning of the portion, when Moses' father-in-law, Yitro, the high priest of Midian, left his home in Midian to meet Moses in the wilderness. And the Torah says that Yitro went to see Moses when he, quote, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, God's people, how Adonai had brought them, Israel, out of Egypt. So Rashi asks, well, what exactly did Yitro hear? And Eish HaKodesh is like, well, what is Rashi asking? He says, Yitro heard how Adonai brought Israel from Egypt. But the reason Rashi asks the question is that Rashi answers, no, he heard about the exodus from Egypt, but he also heard about the war with Amalek. We all know what the splitting of the sea was, what the Exodus moment was, the greatest miracle in Torah. Everybody knows about that, when our people walked from slavery to freedom, leaving Pharaoh's control and beginning their relationship with God. But maybe not everyone knows that no sooner were the Israelites free than a man named Amalek brought his tribe to sneak up on our people and attack from behind, just as we were making our way through the wilderness toward Mount Sinai. And his people murdered the stragglers in our midst, the slowest ones who were walking in the back, the oldest, the youngest, the weakest of the people. And once we realized what was happening, this group of just freed slaves had to go to war against Amalek and ultimately prevailed. Eish HaKodesh asks, what could make Amalek believe that he could defeat a people whose God had just split the sea and who had just defeated Pharaoh, the most powerful king in the region? Perhaps he thought that because they were so freshly freed, so busy with traveling that they were weary, that he could catch them at their weakest moment. And why, Eish HaKodesh asks, why would Amalek choose to do this at all? He wanted above all else to chill the ardor of the people for their God. Just at the moment when they experienced the greatest miracle of all time, when even a handmaiden, the Midrash tells us, walking on dry ground with a wall of water to her left and to her right, said, "This is my God." Just after they understood that there was a force in the universe dedicated to freedom and justice, just when they began to breathe freely and feel safe from Pharaoh for the first time in 400 years, just then, Amalek came and didn't even attack them from the front, which is how most warfare happens, but snuck up on them, looking for the weakest among them, when they weren't looking and when they least expected. He wanted to get between them and their God. Now, Amalek has come to represent for the Jewish people the enduring force of anti-Semitism in our world, a force that we have faced throughout our history. Haman was a descendant of Amalek. And world Jewry understood Hitler to be a descendant of Amalek. Those who hate us, those who wish to destroy us, those who come when we least expect it, for no reason, with crazy ideas about our power, about our influence, those who come to try to stand between us and our God, between us and each other, between us and our sanctuaries. Eish HaKodesh, Rabbi Kalman Shapira, as he was writing in 1940 in Poland, asks what Rashi is trying to say by imagining that it wasn't the miracle of the split sea alone, but it was also that war with Amalek that brought Yitro from his home into the wilderness to meet Moses and the Israelites and join the Jewish people. And he argues that it is significant that he left his shelter to go into the wilderness, which is the place of fear, the place of danger. He says that Yitro said to himself, well, if this is any indication of how things are, I must go join them in that wilderness. Only then can I understand what it is to be a Jew. In the wilderness, sometimes Jews are attacked. In the wilderness, sometimes we experience fear. In the wilderness, sometimes we witness a miracle. In the wilderness, that's where we also receive Torah. He points out that God's name is Hamakom, which means the place, which also means the omnipresent one. That God is in every place, as Psalm 139 is telling us, even in the wilderness, even in the place of fear, especially in the wilderness. Part of what it is to be alive is to be afraid. God is in that place. And our role, our challenge, is to never let fear stand between us and our God. Never let fear stand between us and what's most important to us. When a gunman came into Congregation Beth Israel last Shabbat and held the people there hostage for 11 hours, because in the haze of his mental illness, in the anti-Semitism he absorbed from our world, he believed that they had the power to free a terrorist from jail, because he believed that Jews secretly run the world, because he hated Jews. When that happened, we were all so afraid. Many of us were glued to our browsers and our television screens, just not able to breathe, just praying, praying for the God who frees captives. And the events of last Shabbat may have the danger, for some, of turning Jewish sanctuaries into a wilderness, into places of fear, places where we're meant to feel closest to God, places we set up to feel close to God, places where we're meant to feel safe in the embrace of our community, in our prayer, with open hearts, places where we're meant to celebrate and have joy and have love, but turn into places that feel dangerous, and risky, and exposed, and unpredictable, and frightening. What Eish HaKodesh was saying is that part of what it means to be a Jew is to know the fear of the wilderness. And the wilderness isn't just a place of fear. It does have fear in it, yes, but it's also a place where we receive Torah. It's the place of Hamakom, the place where we, all of us, meet God. And all the more so, our sanctuaries are Hamakom, where we gather, wherever we gather is Hamakom. And that can never, ever, ever be taken away from us. Eish HaKodesh was writing this in a time where he knew fear. Even when there are Amaleks in the world, it can never be taken away from us. This week, Amanda Gorman wrote of her terrible fear when asked to give the inaugural poem just after the insurrection on January 6th. She almost declined, she said. But she said this: I'm a firm believer that often terror is trying to tell us of a force far greater than despair. In this way, I look at fear not as cowardice, but as a call forward, a summons, to fight for what we hold dear. And now more than ever, we have every right to be affected, afflicted, affronted. If you're alive, you're afraid. If you're not afraid, you're not paying attention. The only thing we have to fear is having no fear itself, having no feeling on behalf of whom and what we've lost, on behalf of whom and what we love. Sometimes we will be afraid, but nothing, no one ever can come between us and our God, between us and our sanctuaries, between us and whom and what we love. Shabbat shalom.